Yemen, a land of enchanting landscapes, deserts, mountains, and history, a place that withstands the constant alternations and hectic changes that time carries. A forgotten land, the abandoned streets of Sana'a, the buildings empty of life and memories. It's hard to imagine that this place was once classified as a thriving Jewish landmark, with synagogues in every corner and a population that at times reached over 50,000 members. It all disappears in an unbelievably short period of a few years. As empty and as forgotten as the land seems, it stores with it stories and traditions that reveal the fascinating history of the Jews in Yemen. I set out to investigate and study the Yemenite Jewish culture and what impacts the surrounding had on it throughout the years. In a land where every few steps reveal a piece of ancient Jewish presence, it wasn't hard to find. Before starting to investigate, it was important for me to know some background. Who are the Yemenite Jews, and how did they get to Yemen? Are they considered a part of the Sephardic or Ashkenazi society? Well, first of all, it is very important to understand Yemenite Jews are very distinct from Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews. They are distinct in their DNA, culture, history, and even approach in Judaism. The beginning of the Jewish settlement in Yemen is not precisely known. According to the Yemenite tradition, a group of Jews left Jerusalem in 629 BCE after hearing Jeremiah's prophecy of the destruction of the temple. Historians believe that King Solomon sent the Jews to Yemen for trading purposes during 900 BCE. Others believe that Yemenite Jews, as we see them today, are actually descendants of local Yemenite tribes who had mass conversions to Judaism earlier in history. When Jews started settling in Yemen, they were very strong and powerful. As hard as it is to believe, it's true, and it was because of a few reasons. The first reason, the religion was very attractive and many locals wanted to convert. Also in the 3rd century BCE, the ruling family, which was the Hymite family, converted to Judaism. Therefore, the ruling religion of Yemen was Judaism until 525 CE. In fact, it is safe to say that this is the only place and country in which Jews ruled for such a long period of time outside of Israel. Jewish ruling ended when the Christians from Ethiopia took over until the 7th century, and that's when things started getting bad. The Muslim conquest reached Yemen in the 7th century. When Muslims started ruling, the Jews in Yemen experienced terrible hardships. This was in fact the first time in which Jews were not equal to the other locals. Even during the Christian ruling, Jews were given equal rights, but now, Jews were ruled under Sunni Muslims. Although they were known to be more tolerant, Jews still faced many hate crimes and inequalities. Jews became dhimmis. Being a dhimmi means being a second-class citizen. The concept of dhimmis was present in many other Muslim Arab countries as well. As dhimmis, Jews had to pay special poll taxes to their rulers. Jews were assured to be protected by the Muslims if they paid the tax, but if they don't, they would be subject to whatever the locals decide to do with them. Now, what were the impacts of the Sunni Muslims on Yemen and the Yemenite Jews, of course? With the harsh laws that were placed, Yemenite Jews were not able to have much contact with the outside Jewish world, and therefore Jews were not able to absorb Jewish aspects from other Jewish communities around the world. Due to this, Jews in Yemen developed and kept many traditions, or minhagim, which were not found in any other Jewish nation in the world. Amazingly enough, even though there was no contact with the outside Jewish community, the Jews in Yemen still preserved Judaism to almost the exact, if not even better level than the European Jewish community preserved it. So, throughout the years, the Jews in Yemen developed their own customs and traditions when it came to Judaism. And these traditions stay with them until today, even when they left Yemen already. For example, This would be the Sephardic way of wearing your tefillin, and the Yemenite way would be as so. You see, so it's different, very different from the Sephardi and even more different from the Ashkenazi way. And again, they also had different types of tzitzit and talit. The fringes would be much thicker and bigger. And again, these could be considered kosher by many other groups of Jews from different countries around the world. Also, since Jews were so isolated in Yemen, they also naturally absorbed many Yemeni Arab elements into their culture. Things really started getting bad when the Shiite Muslims from the Zaydi clan took over after defeating the Sunni Muslims. The Zaydis took over early in the 10th century, and they created new rules. These rules were a lot harsher than the ones the Sunni Muslims put in place. The impacts on the Jews that the Zaydi rule had were absolutely horrible. Jews had no rights. There were also many cases of Jewish persecutions recorded. According to Zaydi rule, Jews were considered impure. They were not allowed to touch Muslims or their food. New laws of Jewish-Muslim relationships were instituted. For example, Jews were not allowed to build houses which were higher than their Muslim neighbors' houses. Jews could not ride camels or horses. They had to ride donkeys, sitting sideways on them. Jews were not allowed to defend themselves in various violent cases in which they were attacked by stones or fists by Islamic youth. They would only be allowed to flee in that case. This was the darkest period in the entire Yemenite Jewish history. Many Jews were placed in ghetto-like towns and designated quarters in the city. The hate and violence reached its peak in 1679, when the Jewish population of Mauza was expelled. A large portion of the Jews that were exiled died from disease and starvation. After the Jews were expelled, the economy experienced hardship. The Zaydis realized what a loss they are experiencing. After expelling the Jews were taken back. Only about a third of the population survived, and the remaining Jewish population went to live back in Mauza. This event reflects the very familiar pattern that Jews have always been experiencing in the diaspora. Jews are kicked out, then the economy is in distress, then the Jews are asked to return. Although Jews faced many obstacles, they were still dedicated to Judaism and kept it as a priority. Ottoman rule. In 1547, the Turks took over Yemen from the Razulites. During that time, the Jews were in better conditions. They were again given more privileges, and they were given back their equality. They were able to practice their religion more freely, yet not entirely freely. The Ottoman rule had a great impact on the Jews. Since many of the harsh Zaydi rules were removed, they were now able to have more contact with the outer Jewish community. They were able to communicate with Kabbalists in Sfat. They were in contact with other Jews in the Ottoman Empire, like the Egyptian Jews, for example. This really helped the Jewry in development of their religion, as they were now more exposed to more teachings and learnings from other sages and rabbis in the Ottoman Jewish community. Yemenite Jews were not really in contact with the Ashkenazi community, as they were outside of the Ottoman Empire. In the 1930s, Zaydi rule took over again. By 1872, the Turks have returned to Yemen. The Jews have been waiting for this invasion for decades prior to this. History proves to us that the Jews helped the Turks invade by giving them valuable information and intelligence. They both had a common interest: immigration to Israel. So when Israel was created in 1948, Israel decided to bring back Jews from all over the diaspora. In 1949, Operation Magic Carpet took place. The ruler of Yemen agreed to let 45,000 out of 46,000 Jews of Yemen to leave. Over 380 flights took place in order to transport almost the entire Yemenite Jewish population. It was a very risky and dangerous operation, and the operation was only released to the media a few months after it was over. When the Jews arrived in Israel, they were placed in transit camps or ma'abarot. The conditions in the ma'abarot were not very good. Families of up to 10 people would have to share small huts with no electricity or running water. Even with the harsh conditions, Yemenite Jews had a very good impact on their culture when they arrived in Israel. After thousands of years, these Jews were finally given equal rights as their locals and were able to practice their religion freely without any fear. There were also some minor bad impacts on the Yemenites when they arrived in Israel. They had some conflicts with other Jewish groups. There were many minhagim, or traditions and rituals that the Yemenites kept and practiced throughout the years that were just not recognizable to the other Jewish communities. The Yemenite shofar. This would be a regular shofar used by Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews, and this is a Yemenite shofar. This shofar would be considered more suitable by the Rambam and other sages, but the Yemenite Jews still prefer to use this one. And this is one of the examples of the problems that were created when the Yemenite Jews came to Israel. The other groups of Jews did not fully accept their traditions and customs, and with fear of the unknown, some other Jewish communities decided to conclude that they're more modern, civilized, and sometimes even superior to the Yemenite Jews. In other cases, however, when the Yemenite Jews arrived in Israel, the local Jewish community was so surprised at how knowledgeable the Yemenite Jews were when it came to Torah and other factors in Judaism. They were also very surprised to see how grammatically correct and rich their Hebrew was. The Yemenite Jewish community also introduced many new customs which were added to the Israeli culture. They added customs like China, which is a celebration before a wedding. China is now highly accepted in the Sephardic and even the Ashkenazi community. The Jews that stayed in Yemen had a negative impact on them when almost the entire population left. They were left lonely, segregated, and in many cases impoverished. Today, the Yemenite society in Israel is identifiable with singers, musicians, and artists. Many singers like Zion Golan keep the Yemenite culture alive by making it attractive to young members through music and art. Studying Yemenite Jewish history and understanding the events that took place helps to comprehend how Yemenite Jewry has stayed one of the most identifiable and influential cultures. Their passion towards Jewry and the Torah could still be found today. They're a unique nation that has stayed strong and hopeful throughout their whole history, even during the hardest times, and that's admirable.